Welcome, everybody, to the first podcast interview with Christine Aboud, from CEO, your host of St. Michael's Learning Academy. My name is Don Freed. I will be the moderator today. And we are pleased and honored to have Joseph Fuller, Professor of Management Practice, Harvard Business School, and he is the co-director of Managing the Future of Work in this Harvard project on workforce. A great podcast. We'll put some links in the post as well for you guys to access, and please do participate in that. It is a great source of information. But welcome to today's discussion on the future of workforce development within the military community.
Well, thank you, Don. I'm delighted to be here.
And Christine, if you want to say a quick hello to the audience.
Hello, everyone. A lot of people are interested in hearing more about the future of work. I know I am. If you're in workforce development, if you are a veteran or come from a military family, this is a podcast that you want to hear. And I am so pleased to be part of it and continue learning more so that we could share and be more aware of the skills and the buzzwords and the best practices that we can do to prepare ourselves within the military community for the future of work.
Now, a lot of great alignment. I know, Joe, you've written extensively on the skills gap, and that's a lot of what St. Michael's is, that the core of the business is really filling in the gaps. It's now served over 3,000 individuals from the veteran community and climbing. Very active they are. I'll do some bragging for Christine. I know she's very humble, but they have created the SAP Veteran to Work program in partnership with SAP. So this is becoming the #1 training platform for individuals to gain credentialing coming out of the service. Oftentimes they're trained. This part of the gaps in the skills piece that we're talking about is people, Marine Corps veteran myself, we're trained inside of the military. Oftentimes those do not translate into the workforce. And so we need to come to, as a military member, places like St. Michael's to get that certification and, paper up your experience and leverage that in the workforce. But enough about Don. Let's hop right into question number 1. Now, workforce challenging. Many employers, they report critical shortages, and we see cybersecurity, data, ERP talent. Even while thousands of service members, these guys transition out each year with technical leadership skills, what we're just talking about. Why does this mismatch persist, in your opinion?
Well, it certainly persists, and I think it's for a couple of reasons. The first is that over time, employers have gotten addicted to the idea that they can play what I'm going to call the spot market for labor, and that they have a legitimate expectation that a qualified person is going to show up. And if that doesn't happen, there's something broken with the system. This is a perverse inheritance from the creation of the first online job boards, because when the monsters and the ZipRecruiters first started getting going, employers suddenly said, oh, great, I don't have to continue to drive to the community college and go to the placement office and hand deliver job descriptions and collateral. I don't have to go over there and tell them we're about to launch a new position. I'll just post this and people will find me. So part of it is lethargy on the part of employers. They don't like it when I say that. And really another thing that's been happening at the same time, outside very limited number of occupations, workforce planning has become a lost art. My father was for many years the chief human resources officer at General Motors. And bizarrely, his job before that was professor at the Harvard Business School, where he met my mother, whose job was professor at the Harvard Business School. So I'm kind of back in the family business. But at GM in the 1970s and 80s, they had to think about what is the workforce going to look like 5 years from now. Because if you sign a contract with the UAW and you get it wrong, that's like, forgetting to mention to the contractor that's redoing your kitchen at your home, oh yeah, we better put some power strips in. And after they're done, saying, oops, I forgot that. And you can all imagine what that bill is going to look like. So that's part of it. But I think we also have to acknowledge that a big part of the skills development system, the K through 12 system and the community college system specifically, are very uneven in the extent to which they're in tune with their local job markets. Mm. So there are some community colleges, Dallas College, San Jacinto, and multiple colleges in the Houston area, Wake Tech in Charlotte, Miami-Dade. I don't have to tell you where that is. They are very, very cognizant of who's posting what jobs, what's a job that's being posted they haven't heard of before, what are the requirements of the job, and they have very good cultivated relationships with the local employers. So they can call them up and say, hey, Don, we noticed that you've got this new, digital technician for process control. What? You haven't had that before. What is it? And what are you looking for? Now, I point those out as example because they're the exceptions that prove the rule. That there are an awful lot of community colleges that don't have the resources to do that, or do but don't do it very well. I did a long paper called the partnership imperative, and embedded in that title is what I think is needed: a much more partnering alignment between employers and skills providers, specifically community colleges. But more than half of community colleges admitted not knowing what the employment status of their students were. I mean, there are lots of basic things these schools either don't do or can't afford to do. And so we've got a supply and a demand side problem that drives this skill shortage. And we've been talking about it for as long as I've been studying this, which is now going on 15 years. And it's, it's like the weather. Everyone talks about it, but no one ever does anything about it.
Well, and just like your father did with GM, I'm going to plug the podcast here just because it was part of your show that you just did in October, you guys, with John Windsor you're on with. And that's what you guys talked about. What is the workforce strategy, given that you have AI coming into factor now? We'll drop that link for everybody to join that podcast. But let's bounce it over to Christine. Can you tie this in from a St. Michael's perspective?
Yeah, definitely. I concur everything that you were saying about skills needing to be developed, or having a system or some type of measuring stick that educational institutions can look at so that they can match what they're training, revise their curriculum, make sure it's industry driven, and having the buy-in from employers and knowing what are those work ready skills that they need to shape their curriculum so that their graduates are definitely work ready. We have built into our curriculum, being a tech folk school and very agile, that we know that military and service members, they have those transferable skills. They are the most educated workforce, trained workforce I could think of that's out there. But even though that their skills are transferable, they're not always translatable. And having these industry-based certifications by the trade agency itself, as well as communication with case studies and business case scenarios of data that our employers that sit on our program advisory committees that we are also connected to within our Houston and Texas region, by staying connected with local chamber of commerces and having them sit on our board and review our curriculum every 6 months, is really and truly what makes our graduates more work ready and are able to kind of prevent those impediments, or if I should talk military terms, SWAT those analyses ahead of time, so that we are preparing our students in our classrooms before they transition out so that they can land safely.
Yeah, that's a vital collaboration that you guys have on, and I applaud you for that. It's one thing that I think I'm very proud of, to see that you guys do that in your programs. And it's really reflective of the people and quality coming through. We hear it in the testimonials, especially the people piping into ServiceNow, the crossover from SAP, and just you can see that whole evolution. You see the whole industry lining up around the AI side of the house. So very good. Now, Joe, you've got dozens of papers you've written around this, and we'll bring up the American Opportunity Index here shortly. What have you seen in your research around this, that companies that have been successful to bridge these gaps?
the companies that bridge the gaps first have a clear sense of what their own economics are.
Mm.
And what I have found consistently on multiple topics across the array of issues covered in those papers you kindly mentioned on is that companies make correct decisions based on the incorrect math they've done. So it's not that they're illogical, but let me illustrate with the one that provides me, deep and abiding sense of aggravation. Companies will say in a trade like retail that high turnover in their entry and first level, second level jobs is inevitable. And to the point that, it's almost as if it's the 11th commandment. We all know that Moses dropped the third tablet. They had 5 extras that we all escaped, but it turns out one of them was there shall be high turnover. And that's just nonsense. It's just nonsense. There's no inevitability to that at all. And some research I'm about to publish will demonstrate that. But if you accept that the job's going to have high turnover, then you're not going to fight to keep the next person that says, I'm going to quit because I got a job that's closer to where I live, or I'm getting 50 cents more an hour. You're going to design the job to be one that can be done by someone that doesn't have a lot of experience doing the job.
Mm.
Therefore, the job is going to be pretty low productivity. Therefore, it's going to be pretty low wage. Therefore, it's going to have high turnover.
Yep.
So you see again and again and again that employers make an assumption that what they've got now makes sense, and doing anything different would cost more, as if what they do now doesn't have hidden costs in of itself. So good employers are saying, here are my critical tasks. I am going to create a supply chain management inspired approach to sourcing that talent. I'm going to treat the educator like, if we're going back to General Motors, like their Goodyear, like their TRW, like their Lear Ziegler, which is a big seating manufacturer. Nowadays, aluminum companies would be a huge supplier. When I'm about to plan a new model, I launch a new job, I'm going to go to those guys. I'm going to say, I'm going to do this. I need you to, from your perspective, start thinking about how you're going to prepare for this, how you're going to design whatever component you're selling me, where you're going to put that capacity. And if one of those suppliers has a quality problem, what happens? People at the General Motors Technical Center in Warren get on a car, get on a plane, and go there and work with them when they're saying, now I'm going to mix the language system. If GM were hiring like that, and all of a sudden a program, let's say at St. Michael's for vets, was supposed to be creating various maintenance personnel, and the maintenance personnel were showing up and weren't able to get productive because they had big gaps, they wouldn't fire that maintenance person. They would go to St. Michael, say, okay, we're missing something here. This is what we're seeing. How can we help you? Give us the talent we need. They're taking ownership of it. They work really hard on retention. If you're Kroger's, you've got as much shot of hiring someone away from Costco as I do of playing in the NBA. It's because Costco invests in those people. They have clear opportunities for them to advance, or at least try to qualify for advancement if they want. They have good and generous corporate learning opportunities. And by the way, this doesn't have to be. Some of your listeners will be saying, well, I can imagine a company with a smaller workforce, or engineering heavy workforce, or really good margins could afford this. Walmart and Amazon are both advanced companies on this dimension. my students at Harvard are always stunned when they say, well, who's good at this? And I say, well, Amazon is really good and very innovative. And they look at me and say, I'm sorry, professor, I know you're old, you're probably hard of hearing. I said, who's good at it? And I say, Amazon. And they're shocked because they assume that, company with hundreds of thousands of workers in basic entry-level position must be bad at it.
Now, before we move on into some of the solutions and talk about things like apprenticeships, I think it's a great time to plug the work that you're doing with the American Opportunity Index. This is a great resource for people. If you're in and looking for employment, this is a great way to look and strategize and look at what are the great producers or employers out there. So can you expand upon this for us?
Yeah, this is a very extensive research project that I established working with my friends at the Burning Glass Institute, specifically the founder of the Institute, Matt Sigelman, who's just a wonderful guy and a great collaborator, but widely acknowledged as one of the true leading thinkers in the space. And through the support and intellectual partnership with the Schultz Family Foundation, that's the foundation founded by the Howard Schultz, who started Starbucks. And what we decided to do was look at differences in corporate performance on multiple dimensions, because we'd done multiple studies that just indicated there were lots of anomalies. And one of them was good employment practices that led to good outcomes for workers were not isolated in certain industries. There were really good employers who were retailers and really bad employers who were retailers. Really good employers who were electrical utilities and bad ones, software companies and bad ones, good and bad. So we identified several variables related to employment. What's the rate of internal advancement? What do they pay relative to others? If someone leaves a company to go to a different company, are they moving laterally or are they getting promoted? And we are using multiple proxies to say what companies seem, through hiring right through to promotion and skills development, create a better and surround an environment for their workers. And the differences are quite startling. We look at it by sector. But you'll see numbers like for high performing companies in a sector, a worker in one of these companies might be making as much as 50 or 60% more than someone who occupies the same job in one of their competitors. Is 200% more likely to get a promotion than at one of their competitors. If they leave the company, 3 times as likely to have left to get promoted to a higher level job, higher paying job at that new employer than against their competitor. So you see there are these normative patterns. We will be issuing a new one with a new methodology we're very happy with in late January, and it'll cover 1,700 companies.
Wow.
Including some private ones. And so I was delighted, Don, that you mentioned that it is a resource for people. It's free. You see the URL is on your screen and will be in your show notes, I'm sure. But it serves another purpose. We make sure that the chairman of the board of directors of every company that's public, that's in the index, gets we call it a tear sheet, but a summary of their results against their competitors. And we're not trying to make trouble for management. We're just trying to get the board and management to ask good questions. We do not presume to tell a company, we've looked at you from the outside and obviously you should do this. I was a CEO for 25 years. I would have said, who the heck are you? And I wouldn't say, how dare you, but I kind of say, that's brave.
That's brave. Yeah.
What do you know about it? About my strategy, my positioning, particularly when all you're doing is using AI to analyze something. But if I say to that company that is paying 50% less, hey, you're paying 50% less. Do you think that's a good idea? I'm not saying that sarcastically. Is that wise? And they say, well, yeah, looking at our, let's look at the other people in retail. We'll stick with that since I was talking about them earlier. Oh, we're on that one variable. We are distinctly behind, let's just say Costco. Oh, Costco, the average Costco customer is a affluent customer. They're above average incomes. Go to a Costco and look at the cars if you don't believe me. They're only located in major metro. They're in 82 Costco's or something. So, they're in major metros. They're particularly cited. So, more affluent suburbs can get access to them. And I'm just going to pick a name at random. I'm not trying to, I don't remember the data about Dollar General or Family Dollar off the top of my head, but we're in lots of rural areas. We're in lots of small towns. We're overweighted towards states where the minimum wage is lower than where Costco's operating. Costco's headquarters is in Seattle. Ours is I'm now making this up. I have no idea where those companies are headquartered, but ours is in Montgomery, Alabama. Pay rates here for corporate staff are much less. It really isn't a fair comparison. It isn't even a valid comparison. I don't think they're saying the Harvard Burning Glass Schultz family folks are trying to badmouth us, or I certainly won't. We won't do an opportunity index on the White House because then I'll get sued for $1 billion. But if you just get the board to say, gosh, our people don't seem to be getting experience that have value in the marketplace because we're really low on this threshold of what job level does a leaver from our firm end up in? And hey, management, any explanations for that? And the explanation may be perfectly logical, but we're trying to get aspiring workers or incumbent workers that are thinking about changing just a little more information about where you might want to start. If I want to work in retail and I can apply at Costco or Dollar General, maybe you want to seek the Costco interview first. Maybe you want to do a little homework about what it's like to work at Costco. Maybe you want to become a member of Costco so you can kind of feel what the shopping experience is. And that's $65. So, not everyone can afford that, but you may, I'm sure, Costco's always complaining that people lend other people their card and sometimes you get asked for it. And,
you lose it, you got to get a new one.
Yeah. So, and then they kind of, almost like, the hall monitor in middle school, they kind of take you by the arm and say, well, you need to get a new card. And they don't send you to the principal's office at least. But I hope people look, and by the way, give us some feedback on it if your employer or your worker, because we're hoping to do it again in 2027. And every model has been improved to be more useful to those two constituencies.
I want to add to that, Don. I love that you started and prefixed this paper and this research when he had asked you the question of, why is the skill gap happening? And I love that you said that companies don't have the full sense of what their economics, what they're doing the wrong math. And I think that data like this, internal and also with another data point of external of their competitors, and just presenting it to them in a way like, hey, here's another data set you may not be aware of, so that you can get them to ask the right questions. Because then if you do that, they will eventually drill down to the math.
That is what we've seen. And yes, I get calls from companies that do well. And, I have a friend that works there. I've got one good friend who's on the board of one of the companies. And in 1 year, they went down a few spots. And so he called me up and said, well, what's going on? I said, just the math. I just do the math. I don't, and I can't say, well, let's give them. I know a really good guy there. Let's just give him a plus, 20% boost across the board because. I'll give you a good example. A really good company that works very hard on this is Bank of America.
Huh.
And I'm very impressed by their professionalism and their management, and I'm very impressed by their CEO Brian Moynihan, good Boston guy by the way. His genuine commitment to this. But in the first opportunity index, they were, I think, in the third quartile in banks.
Ranked number 10th right now out of the top 100.
Yeah, but our methodology got better, but also, they companies like PNC, the Pittsburgh National Bank, I think it's called, is they were outperforming, much smaller bank, so that could be a variable too. But the it's not foolproof, but certainly for a worker, it's going to give you a good sense of who seems to have things going on, policies that they're backing up with resources that might have important positive implications for you. And you'll notice there's some big name companies there that don't do well. And, the brand of the company, a lot of particularly high schooler, GRD, GED holders or associate's degree holders very often get seduced by, oh, that's a great brand. I'd like to work there. That's a cool company. Doesn't mean they're a great employer.
That's a great.
I can appreciate that this is all based on external data from the company.
Yep.
So the company doesn't influence or can provide any of that data. So I really love how you guys have built the index and just the methodology overall. And I was quite surprised at the variety in the top 100 even, and just how it's representative of so many different sectors. But it is a great resource, and that's why I wanted to spend some time on it. Let's move forward, though. We'll definitely add this in the show notes. I do want to be cognizant of our time and keep you guys going. I really want to spotlight some apprenticeships and what we see as an approach from St. Michael's perspective as part of a solution. Could it be a national solution? But Christine, let's start with you.
It's a great question leading from our last discussion about follow the money, right? If companies are using old ways of doing things and not looking at ways of why are things happening the way they are, and it's just cost effective, they are these hidden costs that are actually more expensive indirectly to the company if they just try to look at other ways of bringing in that talent. And I think apprenticeships are win-win. They help grow internally without that huge burden of that training cost for companies, where they get this apprentice on the job reimbursed for their time, while we're also upskilling them and training them. If you can any of you guys remember your first job, how many weeks or days of training you got to simulate? Not very many, if not very formal.
Yes,
and exactly, you're just like, here you go. Here's a manual. Here's your computer. You got to kind of figure it out. What I love about apprenticeships is that onboarding process to assimilate and to really latch on formally to the company's culture. And who remembers when you're accepting your interview what their value and proposition and mission statement is? But when you're in an apprenticeship, you're surrounded by mentors and a formal education that is built into their training, and employers see the value in that. I would say that for us at St. Michael's, we've been doing the SAP part of the private-public partnership with SAP and the Department of Defense for over 10 years. And I was getting so frustrated that after every cohort, after every graduation, we have those service members that land very successfully in jobs because they can really articulate, they were continuous learners, and they can really articulate the value which they bring and understand what was the right fit for them in terms of an employer that they were applying for. But there's that other 50% that don't transition well, and apprenticeships help. I didn't want to play Russian roulette with their lives, and they're counting on us to help them find that next career opportunity. Apprenticeship gave the structure, format that employers can really understand a business model where they weren't putting in this money that they didn't have to upskill or find. And now the veterans were finding that, okay, this company is willing to invest in me, and that loyalty that they have and knowing that that company invested in them and gave them that chance was truly a win-win. I just wish more and more companies would adopt apprenticeships and not think that, both from a apprenticee, that it's free labor, and also thinking that if you're working with the Department of Labor, that you're going to have to, be in an antiquated system or not be able to get support. There's so many registered apprenticeships around the United States that they are people that can really educate you on how to start an apprenticeship and how to work with a education provider like ourselves that do trained work-based learning models. It's not just based on a credential or body of knowledge, but sitting down with your team, hearing what you actually need now by business need internally and what your growth is, so that we can come up with a curriculum and a lesson plan while they're in and on your site. So that way you're not just, as you said earlier, Joe, you're not just, hiring these individuals for today's workforce, but for tomorrow's workforce as well, and what they're looking for in terms of these skills.
Now, before we get Joe's perspective, I do want to plug a little bit more that you guys do, I think, great at St. Michael's Learning Academy, is the blending of the industry certifications. When you're pairing your CompTIAs with an SAP or your PMPs, I think that's just a great combination that would help drive retention and readiness. And I think a great example of that is your C5MI relationship. I mean, that apprenticeship that's moving people through training right into paid jobs and employment, all within a year's timeline. And these guys are walking into $60,000, $80,000 jobs in that.
Correct. I think why our apprenticeship has been so successful is the assessments that we do at the beginning. It's not just about, I want to get into tech. The IT roadmap is so big. It's doing these assessments to make sure that it is the right fit for them. Self and career exploration are so important, and giving and showing them what a beginner, intermediate, advanced, and expert in that specific occupation would look like. So if they're coming with 20 years and they're retiring out of the military, this is where they fall on that roadmap. And these are the certifications. Because what I love about the apprenticeship is, in the military space, you have this thing called advanced articulation. Like, they could move up faster in the apprenticeship because of the skill set that they already have. They're able to move faster in along that apprenticeship and get that pay range even faster. Whereas if they've just served in the military for maybe 4 years, they did their time, they want to get back into the workforce, but they also want to go to school. The apprenticeship allows them to do that as well.
Yep.
It's just a beautiful thing. It really is a great solution. We're talking here about solutions for, the future of workforce in the military. I'd love to see more companies look at this hidden talent you talked about, Joe, get into more apprenticeships.
Well, let's get Joe's opinion. From your perspective, what makes apprenticeships effective from a workforce strategy? Let's carve out high tech and defense related fields, because that's part of what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's several things. One, Christine's been very articulate about, but let me add a couple of points. In addition to being a win-win, it's kind of a win cube, because apprenticeships are kind of soil enriching for the job market they're in. Mm-hmm. They almost inevitably help a skills provider get better. All of a sudden, I know, I'm a father of 3, they're all grown, but if when they were thinking about their careers, what if I had neighbors whose kid was an apprentice? Maybe they're 3 or 4 years ahead of my kid in high school. Oh, that worked out great. A lot of people think apprentice, and understandandably they think construction trades, because that's where that's the epicenter of apprentice in the United States. And then they get in we have cultivated with good intentions but bad results, is kind of, well, you're not a real person if you didn't go to a 4-year college, and right. You can only make it in America if you went to a 4-year college. I can tell you that the car I drive to work every day is materially less expensive than my plumbing contractor's, because I've seen his car. So it ain't so, but doesn't mean that isn't the rep. The benefits are there. For the apprentice, it's when an apprentice shows up for the first time, nobody on that shop floor in that office expects them to be productive. They're an apprentice, particularly if it's a youth apprenticeship. It's a kid, 16 years old. That same kid, if he showed up 2 years later with a graduate degree and had been hired in a full-time job, the employer would be disappointed about their lack of productivity. It's the same person, just 2 years older. So in terms of the company taking responsibility for learning, the company measuring it, Is this valuable? In Switzerland, even in economic downturns, almost nobody fires their apprentices. And the reason is they're good value, not because we have, we don't want to fire the kids.
Good business. You said it.
So and then it's also you can link a little bit to the American Opportunity Index. Even if for some reason the employer doesn't hire everybody in an apprenticeship cohort, that person that's not hired has got experience. It'll have better social skills, workplace skills. They'll have something to talk about in their interview. I did an apprenticeship program at Acme Industries. They told us when we signed up they might not be able to place all of us. They didn't place me. Was that disappointing? Yes, but I learned so much, and let me tell you about what I was doing and how I think I improved. And I'm sure they said they would give me a reference if you want to check out that I was a successful participant in their program. That hiring manager is going to find that much more appealing than the typical pitch of, I just got my certificate or my degree and I'm looking for a job and I'm excited by the opportunity that you have on offer. It also does one other thing, if I may. It really reduces mismatches. So it could be the mismatch of the employer hires somebody that's not going to be a good fit. And then I has to fire them. But even more importantly, it prevents someone from getting really committed to a path of study to do a job that ultimately they decide they don't want to do. And I'll give you a quick example of that, which is vet tech, veterinary technician. You have to do practicum and it takes a while to get that certification. And it's overweighted to young women, and they often get attracted to it because they're animal lovers, and the being around and with and helping animals is a noble calling. But what they don't really know is that awful lot of being a vet tech is you're an animal hospice or animal emergency care. You are regularly around the euthanization of these animals. It's not, now I know you've got a dog at your feet, Don. I've got a dog at mine, so maybe I should change the topic. But the idea that they'd never really done the job. They kind of thought it was maybe you had to give puppies their shots and the puppy wouldn't like it, but you're going to see the puppy grow up in happy families with their dogs, and there is some of that. But there's nothing like having done a job to know whether you really want to build around it. And it's really important to understand. We talked about those hidden workers. One thing that drives someone to the margin of the workforce, as shown in that study, is you string together 3 or 4 pretty low wage jobs, with some gaps in your job history in your 20s, you have done grievous damage to your future prospects, because the applicant tracking systems are looking at experience, looking at continuity of employment, looking at how much you made, and they will just start disqualifying you from consideration through AI, because you don't have 44% of the jobs in the United States right now expect 2 or more years of experience. The entry-level jobs in the United States expect more than 2 years of experience. So, I mean, that's backed up by an AI that's saying you don't have the experience we're looking for. No person ever sees that piece of paper. It's all done automatically. So someone's not going to say, "Oh yeah, but he was a Marine. What is it? 5811's MP. So I think MOS code. So, oh yeah, but he was a Marine. Shore patrol, military policeman. And we're looking for a supervisor. I bet he'll be good at that." Never gets there.
Wow. Yeah. That's right. Well, a couple more questions around apprenticeships before we do move into alignment as the next topic. But Christine, going back to you, and then I do have a follow-on question for you, Joe. But we've seen, so we're leaning into that, integrating into apprenticeships into, sounds like, the company's workflow. Sorry, I did not get this sun reflected, so it's coming on my face. But if we're integrating into the company's workflow, like we're talking about with apprenticeships, so are we saying that your research or what your experience is saying that these apprenticeships would outperform new hires?
I don't know if there's a delta. I can't talk from experience because we're still new to the apprenticeships, but I will tell you how the employer feels. There are many different reasons I think employers pursue apprenticeship, and sometimes it could be for all of the above. But talking to the current CEO of C5MI and the apprenticeship that we're on, they just couldn't find the talent. So it's not that they were existing talent, they were talent they can find and then compare it to something. They just couldn't find it. And so they decided to grow their own workforce. So I don't have a data point to say that, hey, let me compare somebody coming through an apprenticeship and somebody just coming into the new job, because I don't know what their past history and educational background and job history is, because they could have been at a competitor and could have bring that competitive edge to that new company where the apprenticeship only knows the view they know about being trained on the current workflow and business processes of that company. So I think that could be a great question, Joe, for you. And looking at, the effectiveness of apprenticeships, look at how many different data points. I can only talk to the ones that I have experienced with the mindset and the value and why that the companies we're working with are deciding to use it. Remembering that we primarily do industry agnostic IT and business certifications, right, based on the fact that I call this term skill lock, Joe, that we are, digital transformation is incomplete without workforce transformation, but with digital transformation going even faster than it has before, we're on this kind of skill lock where if we don't really get these future skills trained to our current workforce now, we're in lock. We can't catch up. So I think apprenticeships kind of catalyze that process because they are shorter, than the 2-4-year degrees, and the skills are current. It's based on what the employer's own roadmap strategy is internally. And it's a great impact on our economic development in terms of the impact that we have in helping veterans articulate back into our community, tax credits that they get for it. And for the other skills, like you were talking, which kind of led us to this podcast, is that veterans are AI proof for the future. I loved that term when you said that because of the skill sets that they bring. So having a veteran-centric apprenticeship to employers that see the value that apprenticeships bring, and not that this great feeling, I always say that every day is Veterans Day for me. It's not just one day. I'm constantly being their voice. It is really good business. The value that they bring from being in the military and in an apprenticeship, giving them that industry cert really, really helps just take away all of the negative connotations and demyths the value of why hiring a veteran. So I just think that it's not just within the military community. Of course, that's our focus for today's podcast. But if you look at our neighboring nations and European countries, you had talked about Switzerland, Germany being number one. They have integrated, they call it a dual system. They've integrated it into their educational system so that that it's not a choice. If a company, it's already there. It's in their workforce. Everyone is part of an apprenticeship.
83% of Swiss students are in apprenticeship programs.
Wow, that's amazing.
So now you often have people say, oh, we got to be more like Germany. Whoa, wait a second. First of all, they started that 50 years ago or 70 years ago. The employment practices of all German companies are predicated on a rich pipeline of apprenticeships, which is why, for example, VW basically built their own high school in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Wow.
And literally went to the school district. Chattanooga and Tennessee were doing great with incentives and trying to get them to grow in Tennessee. And they said, we can't work with what you're sending us from the high schools. We need our own technical high school. Also, in Germany, in 11th grade, when your kid is 11, basically a teacher or the head of their school tells you whether that kid's going to college.
Wow.
They track like crazy, and God bless you. I'm not, going around anywhere in the United States and telling a bunch of 11-year-olds parents their kids aren't college material. I'm certainly not going to do it in concealed carry states because I'm not going to make it through the day. But we need to have an American approach to this. And you see some states, Indiana is a great example that is really in the vanguard on this, You even see states that historically have been resistant to this sort of thing getting interested in, including my own Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And it doesn't take that much. What happened in Wisconsin and in South Carolina was tax credits of less than $6,500 per apprentice led to a major expansion of their programs. The reason being, there are three principal reasons companies don't adopt apprenticeship. The first is the paperwork is onerous, particularly for a federal program.
Yes.
And the follow-up is onerous. And so unless you've got a whole infrastructure to do that, now AI will let you do it a lot faster, I suspect, or unless you're going to need a lot of them or you just have no alternative. I've had multiple friends work in both types of administration, Department of Labor. They always get mad at me for saying this, but if Republican and Democratic political appointees in labor have something in common, it's that they're defensive about this. The second is that the employer doesn't want to have an apprentice and then say, particularly if they haven't done it before, and then say, well, that person didn't work out and I spent a bunch of money on it. But if you give them that $6,000, for most of them, that's the worst that can happen is I don't get the tax credit as a full benefit, but at least I didn't write a check for it because basically the tax credit equals or exceeds what I would have spent on it. So at least I'm breaking even.
Yeah.
Now, this leads us into talking about customization around aligning training and employer needs. But before we do, because I just listened to your Reading and Writing the AI Wave with John Windsor, I do have a question for you around apprenticeships because I'm very interested to hear your opinion about how do you see these apprenticeships model evolving based upon traditional needs to meet today's needs of these advanced industries like cybersecurity and AI?
Yep. Well, AI is going to significantly reconfigure the head end of pipelines. A lot of what people are currently trained to do in entry-level cyber jobs, the AI-supported cyber is already much more productive than the worker. There was a extended period where job postings for entry-level software engineers were declining because Cursor and Copilot are just better than the young, inexperienced coders. That's what we call the reallocation scenario for AI, and I'm a reallocationist, which means a bunch of jobs are going away, a bunch of new jobs are coming up, a bunch of new tasks are going to show up, and so people are going to get reallocated by this seminal force called generative AI. The second consideration of AI, which is going to make apprenticeship more important and more viable, is that as you deploy AI and a bunch of the what we'll call hard skill tasks in jobs get automated or sped up, employers are going to want to hire more on the basis of people's what we're going to call broadly social skills.
Yes.
Their ability to interact with others successfully. People say, oh, you mean EQ? That's part of it, but it's not all of it. It's the ability to negotiate, written and oral, spontaneous communication, ability to be productive quickly in an unfamiliar group. And how we're not good at assessing that. The way you assess that is observationally. So if I really more and more think the winning formula for me is someone with some background, but really good social skills, what I'm going to want to do is see that person in action and then give them some feedback and see if they can respond to it. That really favors compensated work-based learning like apprenticeship. The final thing I think to understand about this is that AI will make the apprenticeship experience better and quicker, which reduces risks on both sides. So it's a mixed bag in terms of plus and minuses in the short term, but like most things related to AI, once we get through a period of adjustment, what this is going to do for productivity, job satisfaction, resilience in organizations under multiple dimensions of resilience is going to be quite extraordinary and ultimately quite positive.
Yeah, this is great and leading us right down the road talking about AI-proof workforce, the hidden workers and your untapped talent. We're going to get there in a second. But before we do, I do want to touch on aligning the training and employer needs. Now we're coming out of apprenticeships. Let's have a little discussion around the customization, soft skills is what we're talking about here, and this employer engagement. Now, St. Michael's, I think, does this very well. Christine, can you elaborate around your employers and what you've customized around these elements into your programs?
Thank you for that question. I always explain it when I'm talking to other esteemed colleagues in higher academia space when they're like, well, what makes your curriculum? Is there a delta between what we're training and what you're training? I'm like, no, we're training the same body of knowledge that will eventually lead to that capstone or lead to that individual that has sound knowledge that they can go defend into the workplace. It's just that because we're dealing with a specific population that's about to re-enter the workforce, we've had to work really agile with our curriculum, and we've built it into three kind of pillars. One, of course, is the body of knowledge that would help them earn that industry-based certification. Two are those soft skills. We call them career skills. There are the power skills where employers want you to pretty much have everything, all the skill set, but veterans need to see how all these things that we're talking about, Professor Fuller, about them having the ability to troubleshoot and be spontaneous thinkers in unfamiliar environments, especially within IT where change management is a big thing, their ability to think outside the box, communicate effectively. These are things that we are telling them, you're already doing this in the military. Talk about that in your interviews. Show your values. I said earlier, it's not just that they're transferable, it needs to be translatable, and giving them these examples in the classroom by bringing in employers every Friday to speak. A lot of these employers are actually past graduates that are successful in corporate America, that are prior military themselves, so they can really relate to their stories and emphasize and drive the point even more about you already have what they're looking for. That's why you're getting these interviews. You just need to be able to talk to that value and explain it with real life examples when you're there with that interviewer. The other thing that we do as another pillar is we do these boot camps, because these certifications, they're changing at the speed of light. Certifications tell employers that your skills are current. I've said it before, the new competitive edge is continuous learning. So it's not the end all, just one certification. You've got to constantly be certing up and getting these skills. By us having these boot camps, it prepares our students for the language inside of the test. It's not just what you know, but how do you apply it? And so we set aside within every one of our training programs time where they get to really understand, what is this question asking? Why is it asking this question? What's the answers we can find inside the question? And just kind of beating that anxiety of standardized tests. And a lot of professors don't want to do that, and take the time every 6 months to do that. So that's really what makes our program for our specific audience different. We do train based on the SAP University Alliance. It's the same curriculum that an MIS major would come out with, learning SAP, project management, cybersecurity. I love the point that you talked about, that AI is kind of replacing that entry-level, tier 1 level type of cyber. On that IT roadmap I talked about, we're really focusing on taking that population that have those first basic certs and upskilling them into the more advanced and expert level certification, so that we can reskill and upskill those that are not finding jobs in that area that are being affected by AI.
Now, very keen to get your opinion here, Professor Fuller. You've studied employer expectations extensively. How do you see soft skill development influencing long-term career growth and retention? How do you see that?
Well, it's absolutely fundamental to career growth because if you look at what skills are needed as you go up an organization chart, they proliferate. The number proliferates fast, and what's added are very often social skills dependent. So when you go from being an individual contributor to a supervisor, that's a really different job. And we have all had good bosses and bad bosses. I'm sure you only had great CEOs when you were in the Corps, Don, but or at least that was your story and you stuck to it. Think about where they were deficient. It was in social skills, communications, motivation, empathy. The thing about social skills is we don't train people in social skills. Mm-hmm. They imbibe them. at home, at their house of worship, on the playground, in their school. And if you come from my colleague at Harvard University, the economist Raj Chetty, has done brilliant work that shows things like the attributes of the community someone lives in as a child very much influence their success. That may sound kind of obvious, but if you move them to a different community, let's say you've got a 12-year-old, 16-year-old, a 12-year-old, an 8-year-old, and 4-year-old, and you're living in a community that has a high ratio of unemployed heads of household, a low ratio of committed to adults as center of the household for things like childcare, that doesn't have active social and cultural assets, that have low presence of functioning religious institutions, and has weaker performing schools and less good public assets like parks and playgrounds, you're going to do less well. But if I take those exact same kids and move them across town to a different neighborhood that has a high ratio of employed parents, a high ratio of two adult household heads, better, active churches and houses of worship, yes, better schools, because what we're describing is a community probably has a bigger property tax base. Those same kids will do better than their neighbors they just said goodbye to. The 16-year-old gets better. The 12-year-old gets better by a discernible margin, better than the 16-year-old got. The 8-year-old gets better than the 12-year-old got. The 4-year-old does better than all the three ahead of them. So what is that? I think that's a really great indication of, if you're in an environment where you learn social skills, which is going to be that healthier, more stable environment, later on it shows up in the workforce. But if you grew up in a household where normal working hours work was not embedded in what you witnessed, it might be you see your mom or your dad working seasonal construction, or being in and out of the workforce because they got laid off or they had a transport problem or whatever else. If you haven't had that experience when you knew at dinner last night, you knew one of your parents had a miserable cold, and when you went down for breakfast, they'd already left for work, and you kind of said to whoever was in charge, or other parent, grandparent, a caregiver, gee, mom wouldn't have sent me to school today if I had a cold like she had last night. And hear back, well, yeah, but it's really important. Mom works, and, we live on her earnings in part, and, what she does at work is important, and she owes it to people there to show up, to both her employer and to her colleagues. And you hear that story as a 5-year-old, it imprints on you.
Mm-hmm.
So particularly with the rate of technological innovation, I'm afraid to say we told young people for 30 years, learn software, and we should have been saying learn soft skills.
I love that. That's the $1 million statement right there.
Send you the bill, Christine.
Well, let's transition into veterans and military transition. Now, I want to highlight some of the unique strengths of veterans, barriers to employment. Let's weave into AI-proof workforce, this concept that you guys have, and your research on the hidden workers and the untapped talent. Let's start with Christine. We've got thousands of veterans, over 3,000 you've dealt with in the military community. Talk about some of the discipline. There's accountability with problem solving from the military service, but talk about some of the challenges that they still face translated. It's always been the translation of their experience into the civilian employment. Can you speak to that?
I think it's a very similar storyline to what Professor Fuller was just saying, is that if you're not in an environment where you could see it or it's modeled to you, it's hard to believe that you could be it or you can actually fit into the future workforce or what's expected by employers and having a higher chances of employment. For a lot of service members, I think it's twofold. The less time served, the less chances of them having the ability to articulate that. I think because they haven't had as much time to practice and meet more real world and deployments of the skills that they've learned. So the confidence is not there. The confidence level of doing something over and over and then feeling that you have that value and you can do it it comes across when they're talking to future employers. So I think for military, the more time, because we already know they go through basic training, they have those leadership skills in their specific discipline or MOS, they can know they can do that job. Then it's translating that military service occupation to what they can do on the civilian side. Sometimes it's an easy transition. Like for us, 92 Yankees and Alphas, they do supply, logistics. They're already using the SAP technology. They just don't know it's SAP. So in our classroom, most of our instructors, if not all of them, are prior service. We have an alumni retraining program where they go through, we rehire our own graduates and train them in service for about a year or two, where they come back as full-time instructors with us. And so they're really able to give examples of what they did in the military and then how to build that relevance to build on new knowledge so that they can articulate, or what we call talk Sapanese or talk cyber language, and that it with professionals inside of that new networking for a new career. I also think that you talked about it earlier too. It's not just a great feeling to hire a veteran. It really is good business. Besides the government tax credits that are out there, they typically stay. There's loyalty. Then a college student coming out and going through rotation and testing themselves and then moving to follow the great dollar, the mighty dollar. Service members are really looking now for the right fit. And they will most likely stay in that job, especially if you are not just veteran friendly, but veteran ready, and put them into a specific area where they can show those leadership skills. I see a challenge also over the last 10 years where, because we are a school and we're giving this great talent, we don't give a fee for service. So sometimes when you don't put value on something, even though it's there, they think that, okay, would you rather buy the phone that I told you was $5 or the phone I told you was free? You want the one I've placed value on. And just because our graduates are coming out with all these training skills, all of this soft skills, these certifications that are very much in high demand, sometimes employers still don't see value. The other thing, Professor Fuller, that you mentioned was they may not have 2 years experience in that civilian certification or industry, but they have 2 years of experience working on that in the military. And for some reason, because it's not the same, they just don't look at it as if it's 2 years. They deny it because they can't understand it. So that has been what I have seen as our veterans' biggest challenges as they're transitioning, is that the articulation of the value that they bring from the military, that companies don't see that their military experience is really experience on the civilian side, and that we're not placing a dollar figure on a value. We're giving them something that's valuable, even though I have not told you what the value is monetarily.
Now, on the flip side, Professor Fuller, and please touch on your research paper on the untapped talent. What are the most effective ways you've seen organizations leverage veterans' competencies and how they close that translation gap?
Well, one thing we demonstrate in that paper, Don, is that companies that have programs that are specifically designed around the developmental and onboarding needs of a subset of hidden workers end up with good results and high ROI on those programs. So, there's a number of populations of hidden workers. Veterans are one, judicially involved, various people with chronic illness, caregivers are, and by that I mean people with pretty significant caregiving obligations at home, not nurses or home health aides, but I'm talking about the people whose caregiving obligations constrains what they can do in the workforce. All of those things speak to, they have a unique profile that the employer has to take into account. For veterans, that's very often making some of the transitions that Christine was talking about. There are a couple of other things, of course. Veterans are the most adamant and disciplined about never describing doing anything they actually didn't do. It's really part of the ethos, as far as I can tell. I'm sure there's some bad actors, but you don't say, if you didn't do what, you don't say, I commanded others, or, I know how to do that. I did that, unless you absolutely did it. you're basically terrible salespeople on that front.
Absolutely.
And so the understanding that, and understanding particularly for combat arms and people who've been deployed in forward areas, that onboarding is really important. And of course, it's great when those people are in companies that have success stories drawn from that same population. But Christine, and you in your exchange, were also touching on something. The standard in the military is mission success, and you have to do exactly, what you were expected to do. And what, as Christine was saying, if I've never done this new thing before, but I'm holding myself to the standard that I've got to get this right. If you've been 0311, a combat infantryman, you may not have any of the actual workplace skills that are required to do a civilian job, but you're used to being part of a squad, you're used to having an NCO that you're listening to, you're looking to veterans in the unit for advice, and then you get a completely different work environment where you're a solo operator, there isn't a lot of team around you, you don't have a boss who's had the job you've had necessarily as you would with an NCO. It's very different, and very often it's that they've got a lot of those important soft skills, like they know 0800 means 0800, and it doesn't mean 0800 plus or minus 15 minutes, and they will listen attentively to an authority figure, and the average veteran, when they make a mistake, said that's on me, because they know that everybody in the unit probably knows it already, but also that you need to make sure you acknowledge it, and that if you need more training or instruction, that you're going to get it from your chain of command. So I think that I'm gonna jump the guardrail here and say some other things I'm thinking, working about on this issue. I think that we ought to be having much more structured apprentice opportunities for uniform branch military while they're still in the service, but they're beginning to move toward exiting the service. I've been talking a little bit with some people in the administration about why would we not think about that apprenticeship being a transit into a new form of reserve status. So I am, let's say I've been a helicopter tech in the Army or the Marine Corps, Navy. Okay, I'm now going to transit into HVAC repair or plumbing or electricity or something, electrician, or even solar installation. Okay, now in that I'm transiting into a reserve combat engineering unit or transport unit. So I'm in the reserve, so now a lot of my military benefits can continue, and I'm earning years of service that might top up my pension eventually. And then now I'm building, if I'm getting into a job that's got a future, it's going to be a job where the skills are required when we're in higher levels of mobilization, drawing on the reserves. So then you get out of something that I find offensive is a strong word, but almost offensive, which is if you look at the programs, particularly the VA program on placement, all they care about is the numbers. And I understand that's how they're measured. Whether you're a bureaucracy or a company, what gets measured gets managed. But if you're placing vets and you're just worried about getting placements, you place them in the easiest jobs to get. And the easiest jobs to get generally don't have a future for that whole low wage, high turnover productivity loop I went through earlier.
It's a job, not a career. It's not a career.
It's not a career. It's not going to sustain a family. It's not going to have the type of onboarding and surround services that will maximize that vet's likelihood of success, particularly if they've had that kind of forward area experience in multiple tours. So it's a false win to take one of our service people and place them in a job that has no future and doesn't really have good career prospects in order to clear the books. And so I don't see improvement in programs like that will lead seamlessly into household sustaining wage career building jobs. So let's make some process. Let's have, whether it's education provider like St. Michael's or the types of innovations I was just talking about. Let's acknowledge that that's the obligation we have to these people. And it's going to take more than putting them on a John board and cutting them loose and wishing them well.
Mm-hmm.
We certainly appreciate you. We're going a little bit long here, but before we wrap up, I do want to spend a little bit of time just talking about the future of work. We've talked about some of the trends right now and what's going on, but Professor Fuller, as we look ahead, we've got emerging forces coming out. We've got AI, digitalization, changing demographics. In your opinion, what will most, and maybe something else, what will most reshape the workforce development in this next decade?
I know it's not going to surprise anybody, but it's definitely agentic AI.
Mm-hmm.
It's the equivalent of electricity in terms of its centrality to the future. And I said specifically agentic, of course. You know, if you'd asked me that same question, or did you ask me, so what about AI, Joe, 2 years ago, Don, I would have said, well, we know the large language models, the so-called LLMs, are going to win. We were wrong. They're too expensive. Their largeness contributes to their capacity to hallucinate.
Right.
Because there's just so much there that can confuse it. Now, between what we call transformers and other issues, we're getting better at that. But what we're really seeing is more of a networked hierarchical architecture with lots of small language that could be billions and billions and billions of tokens, but smaller language models that are deeply trained on narrow bases, and then having them to relate to each other through an LLM is where we're heading. And agentic, in lots of tasks, credit analyst would be a good example, is going to be more productive 100% of the time than a human being. Now, when you are a fifth-year credit analyst and you're taking on, let's say, your bank or whomever is entering a new sector or new type of financial vehicle, all of a sudden you don't have the longitudinal data and the hard and fast rules that, let's say, someone would have for a non-jumbo mortgage. So then I need someone with experience, a human being in the loop. Interesting question. How do I have a 5-year-old if I didn't have a 1-year-old?
Mm-hmm. I was thinking of that when you were saying that.
So that means companies have got to redesign entry-level jobs to be more accommodative and focus more on tasks that still have a high ratio of human and social skills requirement. It means that, and not to get too far afield here, but the amount of capital that's going in, not just to the large language models, but AI generally, it's an ocean. And what a smart entrepreneur does is looks at pain points out there in the market and say, well, if I can solve that problem, it's worth money to somebody. Let's talk about the skills gap. It's a pain point. So you're going to have a bunch of technology deployed against the skills gap in a couple of ways. Mechanisms for filling the gap and, for example, finding ways to get people who are not participating in the workforce or these hidden workers who are disproportionately stuck in part-time jobs and can't transit into good paying full-time jobs, in part because they're building that part-time job history that the AI will kick out. It'll also start finding new ways to do the work that companies couldn't find the talented people to do that they needed. So this is a very, very complex systems dynamics model, up to and including inside organizations, because we can look at a job, let's say credit analysts, and say what percentage of that job it can be done by AI. But there will be people, let's say the immediate superiors of that credit analyst, as AI affects their job, what they need from the person below them changes. So if you build your models around, well, this type of job is reduced by 60% and the job above it is reduced by 40%. No, because that job, if a job is changing materially, what it means in terms of support and surround to be effective changes, and we can't, there's no math to figure that out. You can't use econometrics to figure that out of the blue, because you don't understand how, when all those productivity changes reify across the whole organization at different rates of speed, you never get to a stability that you can analyze. So, there are some very rosy colored glass scenarios about AI, and AI does do tasks that often are the ones people are least like doing in a job. AI is going to make people more efficient. It's going to let them exercise their creativity. It's going to reduce error and scrap, if you will, in decision-making processes. So there's a lot to like about it, but there's going to be a big dislocation for a while. And I don't think that's understood yet. But the last really 120 days, I've seen enough to really believe now that this is going to be a new world, and people are going to have to be brave about it, to butcher a phrase.
And really embrace it. And that's what we're seeing as well. We build agentic AI teams. They're not individuals. We had this conversation just the other day with Christine, talking about not going broad, but very niche and specific with the individual agent, but building multiples, right? And they all have it. They get really good at a very narrow set of processes. Christine, if you don't mind sharing how it shaped your workforce a little bit, and interesting from that perspective.
Yeah, I'm always looking at not just AI, but technology in general as something that will help build a stronger team, so that what they love doing with each member within the organizational chart of our business gets to do what they love best, because that's where they are highest and best as a performer. And so I think that we've implemented our own AI bot. Don has helped with that development in really with our pre-admissions and admissions process, in basically answering questions and filling out information to make sure that we are a right fit in moving forward. And what that does to our admissions team is it helps them get closer to that future student and helping them realize, is this a good fit? And if so, let me help you through the process. And we had to take a lot of me speaking, some of my body of knowledge and things that I've known for so long, and dump that into our Riley, which is what our AI bot is. And then also take all of our, our catalog and our academia and put that into her. And after a while, we started realizing, oh, she's doing too much. She can't talk about now the financial and scholarship options. She can't talk about, all of our different programs, not just SAP, but project management. So now we are looking at that strategy of, how do we use agentic AI to be very specific, but for the main purpose, not to replace, but to enhance our team? Because you can have the best product, I believe, this is Christine, the best product, the most state-of-the-art industry building and infrastructure and product that you're selling and systems, but if you don't have teamwork, you still don't have much, because teamwork is still rare. So if you can leverage technology to help your team be more efficient and do what they love to do, you've created that culture which trumps strategy every day.
But it's brought that efficiencies too, because it's really helped the team understand what they like to do as well.
Yeah.
And so we could bring in AI to pick up a task that maybe somebody was doing. Now they're like, oh, I didn't really like doing that in the first place. And so it's really created an efficiency across the team structure as well, which has been very interesting to see. And then some of the team embracing it as well. That's very interesting. For those of you watching, we want to thank you so much, Professor Fuller. Employers, policymakers, and veterans, today's discussions, we've just reinforced there's a workforce transformation, and it's happening right now. But when you align training with real industry demand, which is what we're seeing, and we demonstrated here in this discussion with what Christine and St. Michael's is doing, and what Professor Fuller and your team's doing, and just all the great work you're doing just from bringing that knowledge and awareness through the podcast, through your work with American Opportunity Index. Again, I'm going to throw this website up because I think it's great. I think a lot more people, we're going to start plugging this in our content as well. I think it's a great tool for a career. We'll be sure to put this in the show notes. Parting words, Christine and Professor Fuller.
I'm actually going to listen to this podcast again for myself because I've learned so much. It's always great to hear somebody who's in a workforce development industry and field. And I love that the light that you've shone on us today, not just from a military perspective, but a global, multiple data points. A lot of the things that you were saying was kind of filling the gap for me in what I knew and what I was seeing. And it was reinforcing what our team and our leadership is doing in taking this wave on of AI and how do we really prepare and give our students that competitive edge, not just by working with employers and looking at job boards, but the conversations like this that are happening so that we continue to be agile and having them be aware of what they're up against when they transition. So thank you. I'm so glad we had that conversation. I'm happy that I had a chance to meet with you when we were introduced by our mutual colleague, Richard Leo in Guyana, and that you are where growth and development is. And that's how we got a chance to meet. So thank you for saying yes. And I hope more and more veterans tune in to hear all the great work that you're doing, Professor Fuller. Thank you so much.
Well, that's very generous of you. It's my pleasure to join you. And I might also just say there's another tool you can find, which is called the Workforce Almanac. And you can find it at the Harvard Project on the Workforce, which I co-founded and co-lead, where you can look down at the level of your locale, you know, your city, your town, and see what are the training programs there, how they fit with local patterns of job demands. It covers about 25,000 skills providers. There are probably about 70,000 in the United States, and probably covers between 50 and 60% of all the capacity of the system. So it's just another navigational tool. And the way to think about your career and build your career is, talk to your friends, your neighbors, your folks, your loved ones, talk to your buddies from school or from your unit, but get 4 or 5 data sources. Look at the American Opportunity Index. Look at the Workforce Almanac. Go on Glassdoor and see what people say about the company. Look at the LinkedIn profiles of people who work at the company and what do they say they do in their descriptions. You know, that's the testimony about what that job is. Does it sound interesting? Are you prepared to talk about that if you got an interview to that company? So invest in situational awareness. Let's put it that way. That'll be familiar to a lot of military, and you know, get that sensor fusion before you walk around the corner. And I think things will go better for you. And I'm rooting for all of you.
Thank you so much,
Professor Fuller. Thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure.